We have become half-life.
Out here, everything hurts.
Everybody's gone out of their mind. It was hard to know who was more crazy. Me or everyone else.
You want to get through this? Do as I say. All right, you having trouble?
Okay, was there ever a day on the set and out there in the heat or the cold or the dust or the piggy do or whatever when you said, I'm going to kill George Miller?
Yes, there was. That's true. I thought, I'll kill him. But you can't. He's too much of a nice fella.
When Mad Max Fury Road roared into cinemas in 2015, it was met with rapturous acclaim.
And the Oscar goes to Mad Max Fury Road.
Mad Max Fury Road. Mad Max Fury Road.
Mad Max Fury Road.
Mad Max Fury Road.
And near universal praise for its breathtaking action and blistering performances. It grossed over $380 million worldwide on a reported $150 million budget. A solid return, though the cost is contested and doesn't reflect the years of stalled development dating back to 2003. But long before the accolades, the standing ovations, and the 6 golden statues, tension was already bubbling beneath the surface between the two leads. And under the scorching sun of the Namib desert, it threatened to boil over. Now in its 10th anniversary year, we're returning to the dust and diesel to uncover what really went wrong. Was it the heat, the isolation, the endless grinding days in the desert? Was it the lack of a traditional script, just chaos and storyboards? Or was it simply two actors locked in a power struggle neither saw coming? In 1985, as his Mad Max trilogy faded in the rearview mirror, George Miller pondered the idea of a female hero in the same vein. Reflecting on this possibility during an interview, he remarked, "I think there's no question about it. So a short answer is yes. I think there can be a female hero in the same way. How we would respond collectively as audiences, I don't know. I suspect that we would respond very well, if the story was well told." For over a decade, Miller had no concrete plans to return to the wasteland.
I never intended to make a second Mad Max, let alone a fourth one. But you keep pushing it away, and it keeps coming back, and it develops. And almost 14 years ago now, I was walking across the street, and halfway across the crossing, an idea came into my head in which it was a continuous chase. At the same time, the notion was that there would be a number of women, and that they would have a female road warrior who was helping them escape. And by the time I got to the other side of the road, I said, no, I'll put it aside.
However, inspiration struck again at 30,000 feet.
I caught a flight from Los Angeles to Sydney during the night, and I don't know where or how, but the story started to play out in my mind. I got two-thirds of the way through the story, and I said, oh my God, that's a Mad Max story.
What began as a mid-air daydream soon gained momentum back on the ground.
And Mel had his deal at Fox, and so we started to talk about doing it at Fox.
By December 2002, 20th Century Fox greenlit Fury Road with a projected budget of $104 million, marking a significant step toward realizing Miller's vision. Originally, Mel Gibson was slated to reprise his role as Max Rockatansky.
And what are you paying him this time?
Gibson would be paid a staggering $25 million, nearly a quarter of the entire budget. Production was scheduled to begin in May 2003, and casting kicked off in earnest. Among the early screen tests was a young British actor, Tom Hardy, auditioning ironically for the role of a war boy. Fully aware of the budget constraints, Miller and his team began looking beyond Australia, the birthplace of the franchise, for a more cost-effective shooting location. They landed on Namibia, a vast, desolate canvas of flat desert plains and towering dunes. It didn't just resemble the wasteland, it was the wasteland. But with a hefty outlay on the lead, massive practical sets, and custom-made vehicles, all under the shadow of an unstable global financial climate, the budget quickly began to swell.
Then 9/11 happened. The American dollar dropped by 25% against the Australian dollar. So within 2 or 3 days, we lost almost a quarter of our budget.
By February 2003, Fox executives were getting cold feet. Stunt coordinator Guy Norris later recalled,
"It was an incredibly depressing time because we were over there, all the vehicles were ready to go.
We tried to get it going. We were 11 weeks away from shooting, and
the show stopped."
Reluctantly, producer Hutch Parker pulled the plug. That was a potential franchise, a movie you could anchor an entire year on. Those were very hard to come by. So the decision not to proceed was a heavy one. All of us reached out to George to say, with regrets, we just can't get there. Years later, Miller would reflect on the bump in the road. "I often wonder, had the film been made when it was intended to be made, would it have made the same resonance? Probably. It's safe to say it would not." With Fury Road shelved, Miller turned his focus elsewhere. In 2006, he directed Happy Feet, which tap-danced its way to $384 million at the global box office and won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature.
I asked my kids, what should I say? They said, thank all the men for wearing penguin suits.
George Miller was suddenly back on top, and studios came calling. His next project? Justice League Mortal. Big cast, bigger budget. But like Fury Road before it, it collapsed just before production began.
I almost got a Justice League movie going back in 2008, but for some inept indecision from a new government in Australia, it never happened.
But all was not lost. As Harry Potter neared its final chapter, Warner Brothers began searching for the next big franchise to fill the void. That's when George Miller made his move. He struck a deal with Warner Brothers. He'd return for a Happy Feet sequel, but only if they finally let him make the film he'd been dreaming of for over a decade. Warner Brothers agreed.
This time, we're to do Mad Max just at the end of Happy Feet 2. We were about to shoot at the beginning of this year in Australia, in the Outback, and in Broken Hill, where we shot the other movies, and unprecedented rains came and flooded out the centre of Australia, and what was previously a wasteland desert is now a flower garden, and this massive salt lakes in the centre of Australia are now full of pelicans and fish.
The people of Broken Hill in the far west of New South Wales have been left fuming after the producers of the new Mad Max film decided they couldn't use the area. Instead, production of Mad Max Fury Road is being moved to Namibia in Africa.
So we had to move from the east coast of Australia, take 200 vehicles and all our equipment and all of our crew, and go to the west coast of Africa, Namibia, where it never rains.
At long last, George Miller was finally heading back into the wasteland.
So you can't just see that beneath this cool exterior is the soul of a tortured human being.
The same year George Miller was celebrating the runaway success of Happy Feet, the face of his Mad Max franchise was falling apart. Mel Gibson was arrested in Malibu for driving under the influence, an incident worsened by a tirade of sexist and anti-Semitic remarks. The backlash was swift, and overnight, Gibson became persona non grata in Hollywood.
I was heartbroken to see what was happening with Mel, because I've always known him to be a really, really good man.
Miller needed a new Max. He turned to casting director Rana Kress with what felt like an impossible brief. Kress was no stranger to high-stakes casting. She'd helped launch franchises, discovered unknowns, and matched talent to spectacle. But this time, she wasn't just finding a lead. She was replacing an icon. She needed someone who could step into Max Rakitansky's boots and be instantly believable as a battle-hardened survivor of the wasteland. And that was only half the challenge. She also had to find a woman who could stand toe-to-toe with him and command the screen in her own right. The search for Max was wide. Every rising star with grit and a stubbly jawline was considered. But one name loomed large: Heath Ledger.
Oh, but every time he would come to Australia to visit his family, he would call in and we'd talk. There were just conversations about life, and if we get Mad Max up again, that he might do it. And I always had him in mind. And of course, Heath was lost to the world.
At one point, a consideration to play Max wasn't a typical Hollywood name. It was Detroit rapper Eminem. Fresh off the success of 8 Mile, he was firmly on Hollywood's radar. We did get in touch with him, though that's as far as it went, Miller said. We were going to shoot it in Australia, and he simply didn't want to leave home. I think he had the impression that if he could do it out of his home state, then he'd be up for it. With Ledger's passing and Eminem not an option, the role remained unclaimed. Until Tom Hardy entered the picture. At the time, he wasn't a household name, but in 2008, Bronson changed everything. Nobody paid any attention to me career-wise in America until Bronson. It gave me a calling card and passage into America, where I'd always wanted to work. When he was approached to take on Max, he didn't jump at the chance.
Initially, I was daunted because obviously Mad Max is synonymous with Mel Gibson and a much-loved character.
From the outset, it was clear working with Hardy was not going to be straightforward. Rana Kress recalled a tense night before his first audition. His agent called me around 9:30 on a Friday night. I was out to dinner with my husband when I got the call. He can't do it. I had to walk out of the restaurant. I said, "What are you saying? George flew to Los Angeles to see this guy. I've got an entire day built around him. Morning with one actor, afternoon with another. He's not coming." And I said, "He's coming. He is coming. Whatever I have to do to tailor the experience to him, I'll do it. Even if he just has a cup of coffee with George, he's walking into that room." The next day, Hardy showed up.
Ballsed up the audition really badly as far as I was concerned.
After his audition, Kress and Miller left the room. We had a long moment of quiet with each other. Then I asked George, "Is this the person you can spend 9 months in the desert with, telling this story? Is this the person that's right for you?" In the final rounds of auditions, the shortlist included Tom Hardy, Jeremy Renner, and Armie Hammer. Hardy and Hammer even read together. Hardy reportedly gnashed his teeth and spat at Hammer. When it was over, Hammer turned to Miller and said, "Tom needs to be Max more than I do." Miller later explained what he saw in Tom Hardy.
Well, I'd seen Bronson, and I thought that was some performance. And then the moment he walked in the door, it reminded me of Mel walking through the door 30 years before. But he had that same charisma, very lovable and still very dangerous. So there's you're fascinated, watching him because you're not sure what he's going to be doing next. Another quality that is kind of like watching a big wild animal. You just don't know what they're going to do next. And I think that's the paradox is is one of the elements of charisma.
When Hardy knew he secured the role, he arranged a lunch with Mel Gibson.
I met Mel, we had lunch, and he handed over the torch.
Tom Hardy came to see me because he felt like he needed to, have lunch at least,
I don't think he felt very impressed.
But I had lunch with him, and he's a firecracker, this guy, so it'll be good.
But then he wrote some nice emails as well to my agent and said that it was the right thing to do and that he'd possibly met somebody that was crazier than him.
If casting Max was tough, finding Furiosa was even tougher. Furiosa was the emotional core and the defiant engine driving the story forward. Whoever played her had to be fierce and have stature. There were a lot of women who read for Furiosa, said casting director Rana Kress. Jessica Chastain read for me, Gugu Mbatha-Raw, Ruth Negga, Gal Gadot read for it, and she gave an incredible audition. Incredible. George Miller agreed. She tested and she did incredibly good work. Already you could see she was very fine. But here's the thing about Gal. We were testing her not just for Furiosa, but also for the wives. And in terms of age, she fell in between. And so the search continued. At the time, Charlize Theron was entering a quieter chapter in her career. She had shifted focus to launching her own production company and was in the process of finding new representation. That was when she met Brian Lord, who, as it happened, was also George Miller's agent. Theron later said, "The timing of it all is quite crazy, because if I had never had that meeting, I don't think I would ever have known about that script." She'd grown up on Mad Max. The films were part of her DNA. They're very popular in South Africa. That part of it, for me, was like, oh shit, yeah, I want to be in a Mad Max movie. Are you kidding me? She recalled being 12, watching it with her dad on the family farm, surrounded by real-world violence. Watching the violence of Mad Max felt very visceral, very real. I wasn't scared by it. I remember kind of being in awe of it. George Miller flew to Los Angeles. They met over lunch.
I met him once and I just knew that it was going to be something really special. He was so excited about creating an anti-heroic woman who was really driven by these very, very pure human flaws.
He was absolutely lovely, Charlize recalled. And I said, oh my God, I'll do whatever I need to do. I really, really want to be a part of this movie. Miller cast her on the spot. She was the only actress who didn't audition. Former Warner Brothers casting chief Laura Kennedy later reflected, Charlize is so physically powerful. She's tall, she's lean, she's gorgeous. She's one of the few people that, when you see her in person, she doesn't disappoint. You're going, oh yeah, you're a movie star. She's got this inner power and inner strength, and I don't think she's afraid of anything. To take on this role, and to take on Tom, who's lovely, but hard to work with sometimes, you have to be formidable. This isn't for a weak actress, that's for sure. Charlize Theron was Furiosa, and now the film had its fire.
And you don't realise at the time, when you think back on all the things that Mel had to do, I mean, freezing cold weather, incredibly hot weather. We started shooting in the winter, very cold in the morning. So, but by the time it got to mid-morning, the heat would start to come in, and by noon it was very, very hot and very, very dusty.
July 9th, 2012, day 1 in the Namibian desert. After years of false starts, Fury Road was finally rolling. Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron arrived on set, fresh from Gotham and fairy tale forests. But now, they were stepping into far more unforgiving terrain.
Namibia is the place that God created when he was angry. And it's kind of powerful, and it felt powerful when we were in it.
Where we were was like being on the moon. There's nothing but desert. But nothing but desert.
And anybody who can go there should go there, because it's one of the most beautiful deserts that you'll ever be in. And there's something that just, it's spiritual. But to shoot a film there for as long as we did was quite tedious and relentless.
We were up against conditions that didn't necessarily make for an easy shoot.
The Namibian desert played a central role in the film's aesthetic, but it came at a cost. The air, composed of 60% silica, exposed the cast and crew to hazardous dust on a daily basis.
We couldn't see anything.
We were doing some scenes in a sand dune where we wanted just a little bit of wind. And the day that it happened, a huge gale came up, and the wind was so strong that the sand would literally sting your face. And luckily I had a very wise cameraman. He said, look, go with the flow.
Special effects supervisor Andy Williams voiced his concerns to George Miller.
And one of the first things I brought up in one of the early meetings was, are we going to be needed to try and control the dust in the environment? And his answer was, no, dust is our friend.
Hardy took one look around and said,
it's just weird. And then this compound of like very strange, half-naked people with, you know, harpoons and painted white or got bits hanging out and babies over their genitals. Well, there was war rigs in this sort of Halloween party that was going on.
George Miller stood at the edge of the Namib desert, watching day 1 unfold. He knew what lay ahead. I knew that first day was the beginning of 120, maybe 130 shooting days, and I knew each one of those days was going to be incredibly difficult, because we were doing real-world stunts. But the stunts were just one piece of the madness. Miller didn't write Fury Road like most filmmakers.
I actually was determined not to do the conventional thing, and that was write a screenplay. So we basically boarded the whole film as a one long comic book. And it was 3,500 panels. And, but because there's not many words spoken in the movie. People only speak when they have to.
There was no traditional script. Instead, he constructed the film visually, over 3,500 storyboard panels, each meticulously crafted to chart the story shot by shot. Dialogue was sparse. Traditional exposition gave way to expression and movement. The story would unfold through action, not explanation. It was pure visual storytelling, not to be told, but felt.
And with a film of this nature, of course, it's when I said before that George tells the story with images, you don't really need a lot of dialogue if those images are working for you.
Charlize Theron recalled,
There is no luxury for words, but I think all of us struggled with it in the beginning. You doubt that you can get something across without the use of words. And it's good to sometimes be forced into a direction where you're out of your comfort zone.
In reference to the concept of having a script, that would have been nice. Yeah, that was a luxury we didn't have.
Tom Hardy was already wrestling with the weight of expectation. Stepping into the boots of Mel Gibson was no small task. But the real challenge came once cameras rolled. Max spoke very little. Scenes were shot in short segments and out of sequence, and often, Hardy had no idea what was actually happening. He was expected to trust Miller's vision blindly, but patience in the desert heat was hard to come by.
I just really wanted to understand what he wanted, and I just completely failed.
Hardy likened it to playing in a band without hearing the full song.
Playing Max is very much just being able to sit with George and do whatever he wants.
Theron, meanwhile, found herself adrift in Miller's boundless imagination. It was so nerve-wracking, and every time I sat down with him, I would ask him, okay, but what happens here? He's the loveliest man, and he would go on these tangents explaining to me things that aren't even part of the movie, since he sat for 30 years thinking about this. And at the end of it, I would come out of those meetings like, I still don't know what happens. George Miller understood the strain.
I just want to also say about the actors, this is very difficult to do, this movie. Normally, you know, there's a master scene, there's dialogue, you can block out the scene. But this is made up of so many small fragments that by the time you say action, 3 seconds goes by and then you're saying cut. So it's very hard for people to get into that. There's no continuity.
And to be an actor, basically it's an intuitive talent like an athlete.
And to ask a runner or a football player or someone to keep stopping and starting again, it gets very tough.
This was filmmaking unlike anything either of them had done before, and they were only just getting started. Tom Hardy grew up in East Sheen, a quiet, affluent pocket of southwest London, tucked inside the borough of Richmond. The only child of a painter and a writer, his upbringing suggested a life of middle-class calm.
I'm from a state of grace called Mortlake. Sort of posh, southwest London neighbourhood. In suburbia, East Sheen, SW14.
I think I'm bourgeois, middle class, posh twat. Really.
And I was afforded all the privilege that anybody could, possibly want for as a child growing up. But for some reason, I went off the rails.
I mean, what was you doing wrong in East Sheen? I mean, that's hardly the Bronx, is it? What did you hold up, a Laura Ashley?
From an early age, he carried a wild, impulsive energy that was difficult to contain. At 15, during a particularly volatile stretch at prep school, he claimed he was misdiagnosed as minor psychotic, schizophrenic with psychopathic tendencies.
My head's a bit of a dangerous country, and I shouldn't really go in there without an appropriate adult, so I understand.
So you're inside, it's like a cartoon in there. It's a bit like a lot of noises and things falling off cliffs and stuff like that, is it?
At times, yeah.
Yeah.
What followed was a blur of drink, drugs, and self-destruction.
It's lucky you're still here.
Yes, and I'm very grateful to be here, it's no joke.
But that chaos found a channel. Drama school gave him structure. Performance gave him purpose. For the first time in his life, Hardy felt like he had direction. Charlize Theron's story began worlds away from London's leafy suburbs.
From. I was born in a small town called Benoni in South Africa.
Raised on a farm in Benoni, just outside Johannesburg, she grew up surrounded by hardship and violence. Death was part of life. She had to kill animals to eat, and neighbors were often victims of brutal homicides. Theron opened up about her upbringing. On the street where I was raised, 75% of the people who lived on that street are not alive anymore. For no reason, for nothing. Life means nothing. In my formative years, I was in an environment that was filled with turmoil. Political turmoil, in a world that was incredibly unsafe, and still is. At 16, that violence came home. Her alcoholic father attacked her and her mother. In self-defense, her mother shot and killed him. Unlike Hardy, her world was far less stable and far more precarious. Theron later explained,
I was 15 in '91 when apartheid was dropped.
Yep.
So I didn't realize until I think in my late 20s, 30s, how much anger I had inside me and guilt for just living my life circumstantially in a place that I didn't necessarily choose. And weirdly, it was this thing that took me towards therapy.
At 16, Theron and her mother left South Africa.
Charlize is very young and very ambitious.
Yes, I would like to try my luck out on the big screen.
And after you get like your first Oscar, dopo che hai il primo Oscar, il secondo Oscar.
After a successful stint in modeling that took her around the world, she eventually landed in Los Angeles, armed with nothing but ambition and a handful of checks. One day, while standing in line at a bank on Hollywood Boulevard, she tried to cash a check from her mother. It was rejected, out of state, and she wasn't a U.S. citizen. Frustrated and desperate, she pleaded with the teller. Behind her in line was talent agent John Crosby. He stepped forward, cashed the check himself, and handed her his business card. Little did Theron know, but that chance encounter in a Los Angeles bank queue would change the course of her life. Years later, her path would cross with Hardy's, two actors from opposite worlds meeting under the relentless sun of the Namib Desert.
Hardy's a bit of a gorilla on the set.
Tom Hardy.
Yeah, probably. I was most intimidated by him. Well, he runs a set, he pee in the corners. It's his set. You know it when you get there.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, don't feel like a shared space. It feels like his space. And, and he's a very good actor. And also super loving, but on a set, you're in his church.
Tom Hardy doesn't just act. He dives in, head first, no safety net. To find characters, he once said, you have to play, and you have to be open to rejection, to failure, to humiliation. On Fury Road, that fearless approach cut both ways. Max barely spoke, just 16 lines. But you could always sense something rumbling under the hood. To ease some of Hardy's frustrations, British screenwriter Kelly Marcel, who had previously worked with him on Bronson, was invited out to Namibia for what was meant to be a week. That week soon stretched into much longer.
Every time I've ever been in any pickles on when I've had any form of voice appropriately within a film where I'm struggling, I'll ask, can we get Kelly in? And Kelly will come in and go, this is what he can speak and articulate for me creatively and constructively and go. And I suppose that's called fixing in some aspects.
Kelly Marcel recalled how Hardy worked with Miller in early prep. It was me, George, and Tom in a room. Tom had room to play. George would walk him through the scenes, and Tom would take it in, then go, well, how about I say this? That's bait. That wasn't in the script. That was Tom, improvised one day in his flat. Hardy was always experimenting with new ways to interpret Max. One day, he turned up on set with an earpiece tucked into his ear, a subtle detail, but one he believed said everything about who Max was. I imagined what kind of police officer he might have been, Hardy said. I had him more coming from private risk management companies or from that territory, the military, special forces. So that's why you've got the earpiece. It's for his team. George Miller wasn't convinced. He didn't love the look, or the idea of having to paint it out with visual effects. He told Hardy to lose it. But Hardy kept pushing, trying things out, exploring. Even during the final chase, a brutal, relentless stretch of action, he was slipping in jokes. Editor Margaret Sixel recalled, "Even in the end chase, he was trying a bit of comedy, and we had to cut all that out and make it more serious."
I think this is a comedy.
George Miller knows it.
George Miller does know, and I think he thinks it's funny too. I think there's a lot to laugh at in these films. I mean, they're so black.
But it wasn't just Hardy trying to shape his character from the inside out. Charlize Theron had her own vision for Furiosa, and it came at 2 a.m. when she contacted George Miller.
I just picked up the phone and I called George and I said, we've been trying to come up with this visual, and I think I need to just shave my head. And he just kind of went silent, and I heard him breathe. And I thought that was a good sign.
Theron didn't want Furiosa to be sexy. She wanted her to be androgynous, grounded, and functional. Miller, appreciating her commitment to the character, immediately said yes. Theron later recalled, "You know, he trusted me so much that it kind of makes me emotional. He was so supportive." Miller agreed. "Look, it's very gracious of her to say that. She's incredibly professional. She was always first on set and did anything to preserve the character. I think the results are up there on the screen." And then there's that iconic shot in the film. Furiosa drops to her knees in the dunes and screams into the void, an idea that wasn't even in the legendary storyboards. Charlize explained, "That scene was always supposed to end on her realizing the green place was gone. The camera would spin around her in shock. But I told George, we need a moment where she's completely lost, vulnerable. We've seen her be so capable. Let's see her be none of those things. It's a character on the cusp of, I'm done, I'm not going on." Without a script to guide them, both actors were foraging for any crumb of inspiration in a desperate attempt to understand their characters. But that level of commitment came at a cost. Hardy, at times, pushed even George Miller's famously calm demeanor to its limits. He was late to set more than once, often enough that the producers eventually stepped in, issuing a special request for him to start showing up on time.
What is Tom Hardy like in a real life?
Late.
Often.
Tom Clapham, a production runner, remembered it clearly. Tom was in his trailer a lot. He'd come out for the takes, and sometimes not on time either. You're like, come on, it's midnight and we want to go home. One of the most difficult moments came when Hardy was strapped to the front of the war rig. Camera operator Mark Gelnicht recalled just how hard it was to get the shot. "I remember the first week when George bore down on Tom after he wouldn't do what George was asking. It was the shot where he's on the front of the rig, strapped up, and you have no idea how much of a process it was to get him to that point, and get him to do the performance that George wanted. It took every single ounce of energy that George had in him to convince Tom to do it the way he did it."
You see the movie, having been there, and I see what he meant now, and he was trying to explain in the sand when we were out there, and it was a nightmare. A brilliant nightmare, and confusing. But it all makes sense.
Eventually, Miller got what he needed. The shot was in the can, but the director began to question the road he was on. As Miller walked away from the set, alone, Gelnicht caught up with him. "Are you okay?" he asked. Miller replied quietly, "I'm okay. I just don't know if I made the wrong decision. I can't stop thinking about what it would have been like if Heath was there, if he was still alive." "8 a.m., call time. Theron, a new mother with her baby in childcare nearby, was already on set, seated inside the war rig, in full costume and makeup, ready to work. Tom Hardy, however, was nowhere to be seen. According to crew member Ricky Schomburg, this wasn't unusual. Whether that was some kind of power play or not, I don't know, but it felt deliberately provocative. If you ask me, he kind of knew it was really pissing Charlize off, because she's professional and she always turns up really early. 9 a.m., still no Tom. Mark Gelnicht turned to Charlize and said, "You can get out of the war rig and stretch your legs if you like." But she refused, flat. "No," she said, "I'm going to stay here." 10 a.m. comes and goes. without Tom. By 11 a.m., Charlize had been sitting in that rig for 3 hours. Finally, she saw him, Hardy, strolling casually toward the set. She exploded. She jumped out of the war rig and started shouting, "Fine the fucking cunt $100,000 for every minute he's held up the crew. How disrespectful you are." Tom didn't take it quietly. He marched straight toward her, visibly furious. "What did you say to me?" The battle lines had been drawn. I don't want to make excuses for bad behavior, but it was a tough shoot. Now I have a very clear perspective on what went down. I don't think I had that clarity when we were making the movie. I was in survival mode. I was really scared shitless.
Scared, angry, disappointed, frustrated.
Charlize, exhausted and on edge, asked for a female producer to be present on set, as she felt the current producer and longtime collaborator of Miller's wasn't helping. It got to a place where it was kind of out of hand, and there was a sense that maybe sending a woman producer down could maybe equalize some of it. Because a lot of what I felt was coming my way from Doug was, oh, f*** it, I'll just say it. It was a man forgiving another man for really bad behavior, and I didn't feel safe.
You've got all the politics of humans interacting with humans, so it was tough for all of us.
Eventually, veteran producer Denise Denovi was dispatched to Namibia to mediate the conflict between the film's two stars. Hardy didn't deny the conflict, but questioned the fear. Charlize is an intense woman, very intense actually, in a good way. I mean, look at her in Monster. That's not somebody out for a walk in the park. You don't summon that kind of authenticity without a tremendous wealth of artistic ability. She is a serious actor, so I don't see why she would ever be intimidated by me, or in any way feel frightened. I think that was more bollocks. But it wasn't just Charlize and George Miller who struggled with Hardy's presence. The atmosphere on set became strained, and others felt it too.
Yeah, they didn't get along.
Yeah.
They didn't get along. I actually don't know what, if there was one issue. I just think it was like they weren't vibing.
PJ Voten remembered a day when the tension boiled over. At some stage, the wives didn't like Tom, and one day, they didn't even disguise it. They were just yelling at each other in front of us. Nicholas Holt likened it to being stuck in a family road trip gone wrong. It was a tense atmosphere at times. It was kind of like you're on your summer holidays, and the adults in the front of the car are arguing. You'd sit back like, I'm just gonna keep quiet. Charlize agreed. He's right, it was like two parents in the front of the car. We were either fighting or we were icing each other. I don't know which one is worse. And they had to deal with it in the back. It was horrible. It was not a conducive working environment. We should not have done that. We should have been better. I can own up to that. I apologize profusely. Stunt double Natasha Hopkins offered context. She was a new mom. She just wanted to get to set, work, and take care of her kid. Ricky Schomburg put it plainly. Tom is very provocative, Charlize isn't, and it was a clash. And for some, the tension was visible right there in the footage. Editor J. Houston Yang recalled, "We get dailies, sometimes for specific sequences, if we need to cut a shot longer, and some of that was the chain wrench fight by the tanker. And boy fucking howdy, was it clear that those two people hated each other. They didn't want to touch each other. They didn't want to look at each other. They wouldn't face each other if the camera wasn't actively rolling." And as the lines between story and reality blurred, George Miller began to see it too. The story is all about self-preservation. If it's an advantage to you to kill another character, then you should do it and you don't think twice about it. I think that crept into the actors. What began as fiction, a brutal world of survival, had somehow started to manifest itself behind the scenes.
Trust has to be earned in that environment, and trust is earned by deed and not by talk, and also through necessity, because neither of them wanted to be together, but it was necessity that they had to stay together in order to get away together, in order to part company. So then he'd never see each other ever again, because neither of them wanted them to be anywhere near each other.
Set up the two characters to be that, and there were days on the shoot where Tom and I felt that way towards each other, and I think it was impossible not to have that. I think even if you don't believe that material affects you, it's an impossible notion When you're living something and doing something for 8 months straight, it just is under your skin, and you want it to be under your skin as an actor. And so there were days where I think it was almost just easier for us to show up and deal with each other in that way.
As months of grueling shooting wore on and the arc neared its conclusion, a shift began to take hold. The icy distance between Max and Furiosa started to thaw. One day, the actors found themselves riding together, Max and Furiosa up front, the Vuvolini and the wives behind. Something was different. Mark Gelnicht saw it first. That scene was probably the biggest change in seeing Tom really soften to Charlize in real life. After the take, Gelnicht turned to her and said, "Geez, Charlize, that was amazing. Did a light switch go off? He was great." Even off camera, the mood had shifted. I went, "What the fuck? Who gave them Molly? They were really civil and nice." He was a different person, a lot easier to deal with, more cooperative, more compassionate. He's such a method actor that I think he took the arc in the literal sense. By the end of the shoot, Hardy wasn't just playing a transformed Max. He'd changed too. Years later, Charlize Theron would look back with a mix of pride and regret. I wish I sat back and enjoyed the ride a little bit more instead of freaking myself out, and I think that was a big thing between me and Tom. Tom Hardy, too, acknowledged how the experience deeply affected him. In hindsight, I was in over my head in many ways. The pressure on both of us was overwhelming at times. What she needed was a better, perhaps more experienced partner in me. That's something that can't be faked. I'd like to think that now I'm older and uglier, I could rise to that occasion. For some, like casting executive Laura Kennedy, Hardy's contradictions were the very thing that made him so compelling. Tom has this amazing duality as a man. He's got this incredible physical presence that is so scary and mean and masculine, but then he's super soft and feminine and delicate at times, which is a unique combination for a guy who looks like that. And as for Theron, the experience, for all its beauty and brutality, never fully left her. Like anything that matters in your life or has some worth to it, it comes with complicated feelings. I feel a mixture of extreme joy that we achieved what we did, and I also get a little bit of a hole in my stomach. There's a little bit of the body remembers trauma related to the experience for me. The road had been long and unforgiving, but somehow they made it to the end. After 2 decades of false starts and frustration, George Miller's vision was finally realized. At 70 years old, he delivered one of the most riveting, high-octane action films ever to hit the silver screen. Miller's foresight in 1985 was proven correct. Audiences would indeed respond very well. However, if there was a flaw in his judgment, it lay in his uncompromising vision that often overlooked the immense challenges faced by his 2 leads. The grueling working conditions, lack of a script, minimal mediation, and uncertainty about production contributed to their fears and insecurities.
He is tough. Look, some very adverse conditions on this particular film and the others, but one day I thought he was being really cruel. And I thought, how can he be so callous? It's not callousness, it's just that his mind is so directed upon what he is doing that you could practically drive nails through his feet and he wouldn't, no, I'm serious, he wouldn't feel it.
A new Max emerged, recast with Tom Hardy bearing the weight of an iconic legacy. With any other actor, it might have felt jarring, yet despite the lateness, the tension, and the frustration Hardy brought to set, his gruff portrayal of Max resonated with audiences, seamlessly blending into the world George Miller had meticulously crafted. But both on set and on screen, the real heart of Fury Road was Charlize Theron. A fact Hardy later acknowledged. Charlize arguably laid down the finest lead character in an action movie, and that credit is much deserved in my opinion. Both to her as a phenomenal talent, and to George for recognizing from the very start of the process that it was time to pass Mel's shoes onto Furiosa, which was not only refreshing, but incredibly smart. Hardy was right. There was a truth to Furiosa that went beyond acting. Theron didn't just play a woman surviving in a broken, brutal world. She knew what it meant to live in one. Raised in apartheid-era South Africa, surrounded by violence, unrest, and survival, she carried real scars. That history, her history, gave her a direct line into Furiosa's unbreakable strength. She didn't have to summon the fight, because the fight was already running through her veins. The tension, the pressure, the isolation she endured while filming, it all fueled the performance. Charlize didn't just bring Furiosa to life, she became her. And in the end, Fury Road belonged to her.
I'd love to do it. I love George Miller, and I loved, you know, that was one of the best experiences of my career. You know, I would love to go and do some more work. Now I'm older and much uglier and wizened.